The world is now staring at a crisis which has been on a slow boil and has entered the nuclear threshold. The United States and Russia, the two atomic titans, are now flexing their deadliest muscles, unleashing a dangerous round of brinkmanship that has rattled every global capital. Take a look.
The terrifying reality of this new Cold War era is unfolding right now in the silent, frigid depths of the oceans. In an unprecedented step, President Trump has ordered 2 U.S. submarines to take up new stations. Trump did not say whether he meant nuclear-powered or nuclear-armed submarines, but he later hinted that these submarines would be placed near Russian water. The locations of these, which are always kept secret by the U.S. military for obvious reason. U.S. has a total of 71, while Russia is close behind with 64.
Mr. President, can you give us any more information on the nuclear subs? And what did Medvedev say to you that made you really mad?
Well, you just have to read what he said. He was talking about nuclear. When you talk about nuclear, we have to be prepared, and we're totally prepared.
A top Russian lawmaker, Viktor Vodolatsky, who is Duma deputy chairman, swiftly declared that Trump's submarines were already under watch, adding with a chilling finality that no response was needed. This isn't the diplomatic language of de-escalation. It is the brazen lexicon of a nation prepared for any eventuality. Trump made the decision of sending American submarines in reaction to former Russian President Medvedev, who had harshly criticized Trump's threat of new sanctions against Russia over the continuing invasion of Ukraine. Trump's remarks also came hours after Russian President Vladimir Putin said Moscow had started mass-producing its hypersonic, nuclear-capable Oreshnik missile. Putin said that he could deploy them to Belarus by year-end.
We have produced the first serially manufactured Oreshnik system, the first serial missile. It has been delivered to the troops. Now the production line is up and running. That's the first point. Second, our specialists and Belarusian military specialists have selected a site for future positions. Preparatory work is ongoing, and most likely we will be done with it before the year's end.
The nuclear saber rattling came against the backdrop of a deadline set by Trump for the end of next week for Russia to take steps to ending the Ukraine war or face unspecified new sanctions. Despite the pressure from Washington, Russia's onslaught against its pro-Western neighbor Ukraine continues with full force.
All right, now joining us in the broadcast, we've got Dr. Paul Dorfman, who's a visiting fellow at the Sussex Energy Group and chair of the Nuclear Consulting Group, and also a member of both the Irish Government's Radiation Protection Advisory Committee and the International Nuclear Risk Assessment Group. Dr. Dorfman, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION. You know, the fact that this is no longer just limited to nuclear rhetoric. The American president has said that the United States will be deploying 2 of its nuclear submarines towards important specific location after the tweets that were put out by Dmitry Medvedev taunting the United States and reminding the United States of the former Soviet nuclear arsenal that the Russians currently have. In your assessment, what do you think is happening here?
Well, it's the first time that a social media spat has triggered nuclear escalation risk. But critically, the Russian response is somehow, quite muted. Russian media comments that Trump is having a bit of a temper tantrum. What's interesting about this is that before Trump weighed in, the US Secretary of State and the US National Security Advisor downplayed Medvedev's tweets, saying that he wasn't an important player and he wasn't a decision maker. So one wonders exactly what's going on here. And of course, what this does very clearly is distract from Trump's concerns about the Epstein files.
You think this could be a distraction from the Epstein files and probably the jobs data that has come in the United States, which Donald Trump is not happy with? But, you know, nuclear rhetoric is not something new. In the context of the Ukraine war, the Russians had been doing it on and off, over and over again, saying that, listen, Russia is a big nuclear power, and therefore the West nations must talk to it with respect. But these tweets that were put out by Dmitry Medvedev has evoked a clear reaction from the American president. But what do you think will be the Russian response to this, although they're trying to downplay by saying that this is routine, we already know where these American nuclear submarines are?
Yes, I mean, it's interesting that the Russian response has been, as it were, muted. And one wonders why. Russia isn't moving their subs nearer to the US. I mean, the crunch point, of course, will come next week when the timeline for Russia and Ukraine runs out. And then we'll see what happens in terms of sanctions on Russia and, of course, their trading partners. But it's interesting that, as it were, the Russian response to what is actually quite, quite strong words is actually quite muted. So one wonders exactly what's going on here. And clearly, it has to be said that it does come at a time when Trump does really seem to be on the back foot and needs some form of distraction. And of course, there are some views about his former connections with Russia that may need to be considered in this context. But that said, of course, nuclear rhetoric is always concerning, is always worrying, and one needs to be very aware of any potential for escalation.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Dorfman, for joining us with that perspective there.
Thank you.